C Leadership Series.
My first speaker this evening personifies the spirit behind the theme of this conference: One World, Risk, Opportunity, and Excellence. Fredrik Haren is Swedish by birth and genes. He lives in Singapore, is married to an Asian lady, travels across the world, engages with traditional Western multinationals just as comfortably as he does with Asian conglomerates. Fredrik has delivered over 1,500 speeches in 45 countries across 5 continents. He has authored a total of 10 books, including a bestseller, The Idea Book, that was included in the 100 best business books of all times. He speaks on leadership and creativity and the power of emerging markets. In the decade ahead, the center of economic gravity will migrate even more strongly towards Asia. In 2020, this region will comprise 50% of global growth. My company has forecast that in 2020, Asian economies will constitute 35% of world output, against 20% in America, 15% in Europe. So the challenge before business would be, how do you rise to take on an opportunity, manage risk, and deliver excellence? Fredrik will tell you both about creativity and leadership in the context of developing markets. His presence here in Bombay today is a part of a 35-speech, 19-country tour in 5 continents, which is spread over the coming 10 weeks. We are delighted to have him with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Fredrik Haren in our usual way.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am very, very happy to be here. As you heard, I do travel around the world, and the whole theme of having the world as my family is something that's very, very close to my heart. And I do travel around the world and study the world of creativity in business. And I do it quite intensively right now. I'm very, very happy to be in India. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is creativity specifically in the developing world. I would like to start, this is the title of my speech. Now, don't worry. When I'm done 45 minutes from now, you are going to think this is a good title. Now, before I begin my speech, I would like to ask you 3 questions. Because when I go around the world and I speak about creativity from different countries, I always start by asking a few questions to the audience. And I've done this in India, but not so many times. So I would actually love to ask you. So please play along. Raise your hand if you agree. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Question number 1. How many of you think that being creative is important in your job? Raise your hand. Yes. Thank you very much. Now, question number 2. How many of you think that you actually are creative? Welcome to India. Third question. How many of you think that your company is doing enough to develop the creativity of its employees? Doing enough? Yeah. Very good. Okay. So as you heard, I go around the world. I've asked these questions in more than 50 countries in every industry that you can imagine, from the Supreme Court of Singapore to advertising agencies in New York. Now let's compare how India compares to other cultures and other countries when it comes to creativity. First question, is creativity important in your job? Yes. Can we have the slides? Can have the slides there all the time so you can see them. Everyone says yes, all right? It doesn't matter which industry you go to, it doesn't matter which country you go to, everyone will always say yes. Every industry, every country. And in this room, everyone said yes. So that's the simple question. Now, let's look at the second question, because that's where India is an exception. Do you think you are creative? Now, normally, 45% will say yes, and 55% will say no. That means that normally a majority of people will say creativity is important, but I don't know how to do it. in this room, it was more than 90%. That makes India one of the countries with the highest level of creative confidence in the world. I'm from Sweden. In Sweden, it's more like 60%. Northern Europe, 60%. Southern Europe, 80%. What do you think, Mr. American? In America, how much? 40%. No, 95%. Yes, America has even a higher creative confidence than India. But India is like number 2 or number 3. It's America, and then Italy and India are roughly on the same. China is actually quite high, more higher than most people think. In China is like 90%. Now, the rest of Asia is terribly, terribly low. I live in Singapore. In Singapore, it's 20%. It's the second worst country in the world. I was just in Singapore, and I did a speech, and I said, "You're the second worst country in the world." And a guy said, "Yes, we're number 2. Singapore obsessed with being number 1, even if it's from the bottom, doesn't matter. Japan is the same as Singapore, also 20%. And one country is even worse than Singapore. Which country? It's an Asian country. Which Asian country has the lowest level of creative confidence? Take a guess. Anyone want to scream? Just scream out. Korea. Correct. South Korea, not North Korea. Last time I was in South Korea, 300 people in the audience. Is creativity important in your job? Yes. 300 Koreans said yes. Second question, do you think you are creative? Not one. The opposite of India. Not a single person said yes. I said, "Come on, someone, anyone here, help me out." One guy has raised his hand and said no. He just wanted to make a clarification. He said no, not compared to Leonardo da Vinci. Now that's the Korean way of thinking. That's the Japanese way of thinking. Are you creative? No. Not compared to the most creative person who has ever lived. What's the American way of thinking? And the Indian way of thinking? Are you creative? Yeah, hell yeah, compared to my brother. Now, I may be here to tell you that creativity is, confidence is great. To be a creative person, you have to be confident. I'm not trying to take your confidence away from you. It's great. Think about it. What is creativity? Everyone is walking in this direction, and you are going to say, "I'm going to walk in this direction." You won't do that unless you have confidence. Make sense? Yes. But truly creative people, really, really creative people, they think like this. Everyone is walking in this direction. I'm going to walk in this direction. No, maybe not. Maybe I should walk in this direction. No, maybe not. Maybe I should walk in this direction. Because creative people doubt. Creative people are doubters. So to be a creative person, you have to be confidently doubting. And overly confident is not a good thing when it comes to creativity. If it's okay with you, I'm going to tell you a story about America. Mr. Barack Obama, President of America, exactly 1 year ago, just before their election, held a speech to the American people telling them why they don't have to be afraid of Asians, specifically Chinese. They're more afraid of Chinese than Indians. Barack Obama said, "We don't have to be afraid of Asia. We don't have to be afraid of the Chinese, because yes, China is going to be the largest economy in the world, and yes, their equality is improving, and yes, their salaries are lower, but they can never beat us on innovation, because we are the most innovative country in the world." And the Americans went, "Yay!" Then Barack Obama said, "We put the man on the moon." And the Americans said, "Yes, we did." And then Barack Obama said, "We invented the car." And the Americans said, "Yes." And the Germans said, "What? You did not invent the car. The Germans invented the car." But you see, Americans are so full of creative confidence, they take credit for things they did not even invent. Now, that's a good thing. As I said, confidence is good, but not too much of it. And some people are now looking at what's happening in America with a lack of confidence. I'm not saying Americans are suddenly humble, but they have been humbled. And that's a good thing for America. It's going to make America more confident. And for a lot of Asia, it's a good thing that confidence is coming up. But for India, maybe we should learn from others to become a little bit more humble about our creative abilities. Third question. Is your company doing enough to develop the creativity of its employees? No. 2 people say yes. HR manager and person sitting next to HR manager. And that's not a joke. It has literally happened to me 3 times. So that's why I do what I do. I write books on creativity. I didn't know they already said this, so I've written a lot of books. One book is called The Idea Book. It's been included in this book, the 100 Best Business Books of All Time. But I'm not here to talk about that book. I'm here to talk about another book, and the theme of another book that I have written. And that book is called The Developing World. The subtitle is How an Explosion of Creativity in Developing Countries is Changing the World, and Why the Developed World Has to Start Paying Attention. Since 2005, I've been living in Asia. I've been living in China, I live now in Singapore, and I have been to almost at least every major Asian country and studied creativity in Asia. I interviewed more than 250 people who work with creativity and live in developing countries. From the innovation minister of Indonesia to web designers in Shanghai, I wanted to understand what does it mean when the developing world starts to innovate. Because that's what's happening. It's an explosion going on, and I want to understand what it means. And I want you to understand what it means, because I have a feeling you don't fully understand what it means. Or maybe you understand what it means, you in this room, but as a country, you don't. And if you did, there would be a huge advantage. And I'm not saying this to be nice. I'm not a white guy who says I'm doing this to be nice to you. I have moved to this part of the world. I'm going to live in this part of the world, and my kids are going to grow up here. I truly believe that this part of the world has the potential to be the most creative part of the world, and that's what I'm going to argue in my 45 minutes. But before we can argue why you have the potential to be more creative than other parts of the world, first we have to look at what creativity is. What's the definition of an idea? Westerners, we like to say that an idea is something new, something that has nothing, almost something magical, something that just pops into your head. Now, after living in Asia for the 8 years, I like to define creativity differently. Now I define creativity like this. An idea is that one person takes 2 formerly known things and combines them in a new way. One person takes 2 formerly known things and combines them in a new way. Or in another way of saying it, a person takes knowledge and information and combines it in a new way. There are no new ideas. Every idea is a combination of something else. The trick, of course, how you combine what you know. So just to illustrate some quick, fast examples. Let's say we take the concept of smoking, and now we want to get people to stop smoking, and we have knowledge and information about what it means to smoke. And one of those things that we now know is that if you smoke, at least in many countries, it's so expensive to smoke that in your lifetime you will smoke up the cost of a car. So now we have bits and pieces of information and facts and knowledge. Now the creativity comes in is how do you combine these facts and knowledges into an advertisement to get people to understand how expensive it is to smoke. So we know we want people to smoke, and we know the cost is as much as the price of a car. Now combining those two, we get this, which is a very creative way of illustrating how much it costs to smoke. Now companies, a lot of companies, especially HR departments, they will put a lot of money onto giving people access to knowledge. And they will put a lot of money on giving people access to information. Education, courses, conferences, internet subscriptions. But how much money are we putting on the plus? How much money are we putting on giving people the ability to take that knowledge and take that information and learn how to combine it in a new way? Because just because we have knowledge and information does not make us creative. And that's the problem with a lot of school systems in the world. We give our students a lot of knowledge and information, but not a lot of knowledge about how to combine it in new ways. So I'm now going to show you what is my favorite example right now about how a person took two previously known things and combined them in a new way. It's a very simple product. It's almost a very humble little product, but it's a great example how every product in the world can be improved with creativity. This is a guy in Estonia. He took the concept of a sink, which is a previously known thing, and he took the concept of a urinal, which is a previously known thing. Now you take sink and urinal, you combine the two, and what do you get? I was recently in the US, and a guy said, what, shower? No, you get this. Now, most people don't understand, so here's an illustration. First you pee, now you wash your hands. Now the water used to wash your hand is now reused to flush your pee. Is this a good idea, yes or no? Yes. Because it saves water, it saves time, and it saves space. Now, I'm not saying that this guy should get the Nobel Prize. It's a very simple innovation. But I like this so much because at least every guy in this room, every man in this room, you have stood in front of a urinal in your life 10,000 times. And never have you said to yourself, hey, wait, should be a sink here. And to me, that proves that we can stand in front of innovation, right in front of it, 10,000 times, and still not see what we could do to improve it. And the urinal has been looking the same for almost 2,000 years, and still we could make an improvement. Every industry can be improved, every product can be improved by people who have the ability to look further and combine different things that we don't normally connect with this product and make it slightly better. Because that's what creativity is, the ability to make it slightly better. Okay. And now I have to do something that I normally don't do. But for this group, I have to do it, and it's your fault. Because I know there are two speakers here, and the other speaker is a man who's going to talk to you how it is to survive a terrorist attack in the middle of nowhere and what we can learn from that. And I am going to speak about creativity. Now, normally, if you invite a speaker to say, let's say he's going to talk about how to survive a terrorist attack on the middle of the ocean, you would expect that person to actually have survived a terrorist attack on the middle of the ocean, correct? If you invite someone to talk about how to climb Mount Everest, you would expect that this person has actually climbed Mount Everest, correct? But if you invite an author of business books on creativity, what do you expect him to talk about? How other people do things differently. Creativity authors write books and books and books about how everyone else does things creatively. And they put it in a book that looks just like all other books. My industry is an industry full of hypocrites. So I decided tonight I should make an exception. I'm going to give you one example about how I took two previously known things and combined them in a new way. Don't you think that's fair? Put your money where your mouth is. Indians like that, don't you? Yeah, so are you ready? Are you ready for creative brilliance? Yes, here we go. I took two previously known things, I combined them in a new way. I took the concept of a book. My book is 50% book. And I took the concept of a notebook. My book is 50% notebook. Now, book is nothing new, notebook is nothing new. But book and notebook combined gives you what? A book and a notebook. So here's my book. 50%, here you can read how to become a more creative person. 50% notebook, here you can write down all the brilliant ideas you get when you read my book. Tough crowd. See? That's India for you. I'm just warning. Have you spoken in India before? No, this is India. You see, this guy is American. If I do this in America, I say I took a book, I took a notebook, I combined the two, I got a book and a notebook. You know what Americans do, Miss Indians? Listen to me. This is what Americans do. They go, oh, wow, that's amazing. Here's like, Indians can be so rude. But once I did a mistake. Once I was in America, and an American group said, oh, that's amazing. I said, thank you very much. Why is it amazing? I don't know. I love Indians. India is my favorite. I'm not saying this to be nice to you. India is my #1 country. Of all the 50 I've spoken in, India is my #1 country to speak in because Indian people love to question things, love to ask questions, and they will tell you if you don't think they have a good idea. That's what you did. And then you're still a little bit polite. You went, but now I have a problem. Because when I was introduced, I had written one of the 100 best business books of all time, and you had respect for me. But then I give you my brilliant idea, and you go, what? That's his idea? Some stupid white pages in a book? And now, the respect is gone. So I need to do something to rebuild credibility, or you won't listen to the rest of my speech. So here's my message to you. Just because you don't see creative brilliance when it's presented to you, doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Just means you're not good at seeing good ideas. So now I'm going to show you to you why this was much better, not a Nobel Prize winning idea, but much better than you thought. Here, it's why it's much better than you thought. The average business book sells 3,500 copies globally in its lifetime. The world of business books is extremely competitive. 3,500 copies, legally, and of course the black market, but legally. Why? Because there are 20,000 business books published every year, but the budget for management book is very tiny. The average company buys on average 1 book to its employees per year. That's a 1 in a 20,000 chance that they pick your book. That's why the average book sells 3,500 copies. I have, in Singapore alone, sold 15,000 copies. How did I do that? Because my book is not a book. My book is a notebook. Notebooks are not bought on the budget for management books. Notebooks are bought on the budget for stationery. And how big is the budget for stationery? Ka-ching! The average book sells 3,000. No, wait. Hold it. Just a little bit. The average book sells 3,500 copies. I have in Singapore sold 15,000 copies. I have in Sweden, I come from Sweden, sold 150,000 copies. I have in Iceland sold 3,000 copies. How many people live in Iceland? 300,000 people. That means 1% of a country's population bought my book in a month. That's better than Harry Potter. I've sold 250,000 copies of this book, and I self-publish. I have no employees. I did it all myself. Hopefully, the respect is now back in the room. But that's not the point. My point is to show to you that every product can be improved just a little bit. Now, here is the problem. Everyone talks about the values of being creative. Everyone talks of the importance to be able to change. And every CEO will say, we are going to be innovative and innovate. But most people don't know how to do it because we have never been taught. And that means that when the world actually do change, we are not able to benefit from that change. Just 2 funny pictures. This is a picture of the first train. Because when we went from horse carriages to trains, the people in the horse carriage industry continued to build horse carriages. Therefore, the first trains just look just like horse carriages. Here's the first car. And last week, I did a speech for one of the very big German car companies. Let's just say, I don't have to say which one, but one of them. And I challenged them, and I said, I'm sorry, but your product, the car, is nothing but a highly advanced horse carriage. And in 100 years, you've just done small incremental improvements, but it's still a horse carriage. I actually challenged them. I said, in 100 years, how much have you been able to improve on the horse carriage? And one guy said, well, we turned 2 guys around. But the reason I'm showing you old pictures is because we can look at these pictures and 100 years later laugh at them. But 100 years from now, they are going to look at what you are doing in your industry, and they are going to laugh at you. We are equally bad at adopting to change and being creative now as we were 100 years ago. So that was a quick introduction to the concept of creativity. Now, to the main theme of my speech. Why do I believe that the developing world is better positioned to be creative than the developed world? Because that's exactly what I'm going to argue. Now, please don't get me wrong. it's very easy to argue the opposite, that the developed world has an advantage over the developing world. It's more advanced, it's less corrupt, it's not so chaotic, la la la. It's very easy to argue that. My point here is, we argue like that all the time. It's such an old story. We never hear the opposite. We never hear, what can the developed world learn from the developing world? When did we ever say that? Or, in your case, what can India learn from other developing countries, and not what can we learn from the developed world? Now, in the book, I talk about 7 different advantages. Today, I will only talk about 3. But first, let's look at why it's so dangerous to be a developed country. I would argue that we did a huge mistake roughly 30 years ago when we divided, and I say we, I mean the West, we divided the world into 2 parts, the developing world and the developed world. What was the mistake that we did? The mistake we did was to call ourselves developed and developing. Now, let's look at these words and see what they mean. What does a developing country mean, literally? What's the meaning of the word? Changing, improving, dynamic. It's a process, and the process is ongoing. It's like saying, I am baking a cake, or I am building a house. And as long as I'm doing it, I can change it. It's a dynamic process. It's like cement. As long as it's not, we're steering it, we can change it. But when we stop and it becomes solid, it's very difficult to change. So that's you poor people in the developing world. Now let's look at us, the people from the developed world. What does the word developed country literally mean? It means done, finish. My country is done. How is your country doing over there? What a stupid idea. In a time in the history of man when the world has never changed faster than now, my part of the world told ourselves and our kids, hey, we're done. I mean, of course, we can make small improvements, but more or less, we're done. Who came up with this stupid, stupid idea? I work a lot with airports, and I work with Changi Airport, and Changi Airport is the best airport in the world, and has been so for 17 years in a row. It's an amazing feat. I met with Changi Airport, and they told me that when they were building Changi Airport 20 years ago, they went to Schiphol, Amsterdam Airport, because that was the best airport in the world. And they said, what can we learn from the best? Because we need to develop. They went to Schiphol, they took everything they can learn from Schiphol and everything they can learn from other airports as well, and they went back to Singapore and they built the best airport in the world. Now, I recently asked Singapore Airport, I said, when is the last time that Amsterdam Schiphol Airport came and visited you? And they said they have never been here. And the problem with the developed world is that we thought we were done. So now, let's look at some of your advantages. Now, I know what you're going to say. Actually, no, you're not going to say this. I know what they say in the West when I do this speech. They say, Fredrik, I don't know which part of the world you've been on, but you see, all the innovation is happening in the developed world. You see, the developing world, they don't know how to innovate. It's not in their culture. Ever heard that? They say, Fredrik, didn't you used to live in China? China is a perfect example. They don't have a culture of innovation. They have a culture of... What is China famous for when it comes to innovation and creativity? Exactly. You see, the developing world, they just copy us. The reason you feel there's so much innovation and change there, they're just copying us. That's not innovation, that's copying. And they have a point. The people who say that have a point. Especially the Chinese, but Asia generally, you are masters at copying. There are fake eggs in China. How can you make a fake egg? There are fake Mercedes-Benz cars in China. The whole car is fake. I was walking in the streets of Singapore with my wife, and I saw a billboard, and I said to my wife, that looks amazing. Look, a BlackBerry for $200. She said, Fredrik, read again. I read again. He said, Blueberry, $200. It's a fake BlackBerry from China. But here's my favorite example. A Chinese mayor a few years back decided to build a new city for 30,000 Chinese. And to get some inspiration, he went to Europe to look at cute cities in Europe. So he went to Austria and Switzerland and Denmark, and he came to Sweden. And we have a really, really cute city in Sweden called Sigtuna, which is 1,000 years old. And the Chinese fell in love. And they took millions of pictures, and this is a true story. They went back to China and built an exact replica. I'm not talking of a fake building or 2 fake buildings. No, the whole goddamn town is a copy. Every tree is a copy. There's even a church. They're not Christians, hello. Never mind, it should be there, it's on the drawing. They copy everything. But then I met this woman, Chinese woman, 29-year-old, the new Asian person, creative, young, dynamic. She looked at me and she said, Fredrik, you Westerners, you're obsessed with innovation. That's all you talk about. New, new, new. She said, you talk about intellectual property. You talk about patents. You talk about copyright. And she looked at me and she said, Fredrik, it's not about copyright. I said, no, it's about copying right. And my first reaction was to laugh. My second reaction was to get angry. You have no shame in your body. But then I said, wait, she actually has a point. Remember my definition of an idea. You take 2 previously known things, you combine them in a new way. What does that mean? It means it's impossible to create anything without copying something. Every creative person copies. Albert Einstein said it very beautifully. He said, creativity is your ability to hide your sources. Now ask yourself this question. Who has the potential to be the most creative mayor? A Chinese mayor who realizes that he's not supposed to go to Europe and look at 100 cute cities and steal one. He's supposed to go to 100 cute cities in Europe and take the best of everything that he saw, bring it home to China, and build the most beautiful city that he could find. Or an American mayor who doesn't have a passport, never leaves America, and says all great ideas come from America. Who would you put your money on? I'm putting my money on Asia. And just to illustrate this, let me share a story. When I was living in China, there was a conference, and the theme of the conference was, how can China become an innovative country? There's 1,000 Chinese in the audience. There were 4 white people on stage, because white people are teaching Asian people how to innovate. Those white people were the head of Ericsson in China, from Sweden, the head of Nokia in China, from Finland, and the head of Motorola in China, from America. 4th person was me. We all got the same question. How can China become an innovative country? The guy from Ericsson said, if China wants to be an innovative country, you need to stop copying. Okay, China wrote it down. Then the guy from Nokia, he said, if China wants to be an innovative country, you need to stop copying. And then the guy from Motorola, he said, if China wants to be an innovative country, you need to stop copying. And then me. So I said, if China wants to be an innovative country, you need to stop copying. No, of course I didn't say that. It would be a very boring story, right? No, instead I said, well, sorry, gentlemen, but which one of you invented the mobile phone? Because the other 2 must have copied. Everyone copies. And what we need to learn is to copy more, not less. Now here's the second advantage. If you live in a developing country, you are better positioned to see change. Because if you want to be able to react to change, you need to be able to see it. And the problem with the developing world, the developed world, is this is where the change is happening. Let's look at 2 pictures. This is Sweden 45 years ago when I was born. And the second one is Beijing 45 years ago when I was born. Now, let's compare how these two cities have changed during my lifetime. If you're a Chinese person, you used to live in a city like this, now you live in a city like that. And that means you are able to see how quickly the world is changing. For you, this is natural. Now let's go back to Stockholm. This is Stockholm 45 years ago. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Stockholm today. Actually, I'm sorry, we have one new building, there it is. What's my point? My point is that people who live in the developed world are living in a world that is changing slower, and just because of that, we need to try much harder just to understand how quickly the world is changing. And the problem is that we don't. Which brings us to the third advantage. And the by far most important advantage, and the feeling I have when I'm here, is that you don't understand how big this advantage is to you. So let's look at it. Your advantage is knowledge. Now, normally we talk about the opposite. We talk about how the developed world has a knowledge advantage over the developing world. No, it's the opposite. You have the advantage. So let's look at two people. Let's take an Indian. An Indian person has knowledge about the Indian culture. You watch Bollywood movies, you eat Indian food, you know Indian politicians, you know Indian entrepreneurs, you watch cricket. You know that part. But you also know about my culture. You eat at McDonald's, you listen to Lady Gaga, you know the name of the President of America, you know Tiger Woods, yes or no? You know that Tiger Woods cheated on his Swedish wife? How can you know that? A Swede cannot say a single name of a single cricket player in the world, and you know the name of the you even know the names of the wives that cheated. How is that possible? Now remember the definition of an idea. You take two previously known things, you combine them in a new way, and that means that your worldview looks like this. You can take the best of the Asian culture and the best of the Western culture, and you can now combine those two into something new. And more importantly, you can create fusion, which is you take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you combine it. In your case, tandoori pizza is a great example. Indian food, Italian food combined, perfect pizza. So let me show you what this means. When I went to Singapore in 2008, this Chinese movie called Red Cliff just started to show in the cinemas of Singapore. Same weekend, an American movie called Batman also started to show in the cinemas of Singapore. And that means that a Singaporean on Friday night watches an American movie, and on Friday night watches a Chinese movie. Like this is the most natural thing in the world. Because for him, it is the most natural thing in the world. I went to a university in Singapore and I asked 100 students at university level. I said, how many of you have seen the movie Batman? 80% said yes. How many of you have seen the movie Red Cliff? 80% said yes. Then I went to the Stockholm School of Economics and I asked 100 students in Stockholm, how many of you have seen the movie Batman? 80% said yes. How many of you have seen the movie Red Cliff? Take a guess, how many? One. And he was a Chinese exchange student. Now, you're saying to yourself, we don't watch Chinese movies. No, you don't, but you watch Bollywood movies, you watch Indian movies. You watch Hollywood and Bollywood. If I use Microsoft Word, Swedish edition, and I write Bollywood, it comes up with a red line under it. It's a misspelling in my culture. Did you mean Hollywood? No, I meant Bollywood. And what you don't understand is how utterly, utterly ignorant we are about your part of the world. You think this is natural. It's not natural for us. We don't know crap about you. You know that Tiger Woods is cheating on his Swedish wife. We don't know anything about you. Nothing. Last time I was in India, a man came up to me afterwards and said, yes, you have a point, and it makes sense. But that has changed now, because now India is hot. Our culture is cool. You are now learning about us. Slumdog Millionaire is movie of the year. You now know about us. I said, I wish you were right, but you underestimate our ignorance. That is your biggest problem. You underestimate our ignorance. So let me ask you a question. If I go back to the US or Europe, which I do a lot, and I ask business people in the West, business people for big companies, raise your hand if you can say the name of the leader of China or the name of the leader of India. Take a guess. How many percent can do that? Take a guess. How many percent? Obviously a low number, but how low? Huh? Yeah, see, 5%. That is your biggest problem. You underestimate our ignorance. It's not 5%, it's not 10%, it's not 1%, it is 0.1%. You go, no, yes. I have asked 100,000 business people in Europe and America. It is 1 in 1,000. And that person is usually an Asian person who moved there. I just came back from America recently, and I say, how can you know Mao and how can you know Gandhi? How can you know the names of the biggest political leaders of the 2 largest countries in the world 30 years ago, but now, when they are the biggest market for your products, and now when you have the internet, how can you be more ignorant about the world today than you were 30 years ago? Doesn't make sense. And a woman got so upset, she stood up and interrupted my speech and said, that's a very unfair comparison. I said, really, why? Because the reason we don't know the names of the Indian and Chinese leaders today is because the names are so long and difficult now. Okay, let's see. What's the name of the leader of India? Singh. That's not very hard. What's the name of the leader of China? Xi. Even easier. 2 letters. 1 shorter than Mao. Which one is the tricky one? Barack Hussein Obama. That's tricky. You know the Tiger Woods is cheating on his Swedish wife. We can't see the name of your political leader. We can't say the name. I say, go to Europe. Say the names of 10 people who live in the developing world. And they go, Mao, Gandhi. No, who are still alive. They go, Nelson Mandela. And then they stop. We don't know nothing about you. Now, why is that important? It is important because now the growth is here. The trends are started here, and I'm going to show you what happens when someone has knowledge about East and knowledge about the West and what that means for creativity. And I have 2 words for you, and those 2 words are Gangnam Style. It's a perfect example of how a Korean had knowledge about how to make a song and a video that people in Asia would like, but also how to make a song and a video that people in the West would like. And Gangnam Style is now the perfect example of how Asian creativity is not only mimicking the West, but is starting trends and defining not only what is cool, but what is beautiful, trendy, funny, and so on. And that was started here. And if you don't think this is a good song, that's not the point. The point is not if this is a good song or a bad song. The point here is this is the most successful song in the history of mankind. It's 1 billion downloads in 6 months. Now that is the power of knowing both parts of the world. Now, time for me to wrap up. My speech is not about countries. Actually, I was really inspired by the slogan that we saw earlier about the world is my family. Because I'm not interested in countries versus countries. Some people say that the 21st century is the century of Asia. No, it's not. The 21st century is the global century. But you are better positioned for the global century because you know about the world. We only know about half of it. And that half is not changing. But I'm not talking about countries. It's not about America versus India. It's not about China versus Germany. This speech has been a metaphor for you to think about what creativity means. What I want you to ask yourself really is this question. Are you working for or running a developing organization or a developed organization? Because that's exactly the same thing. Nokia used to be a developing organization. They went from tires and toilet paper to mobile phones. They challenged things. They saw a change coming. Mobile phones are coming. We're going to get into mobile phones. They innovated. They changed. They took ideas from different industries. They combined it, and they did great. And they went from nothing to 40% market share. But then they stopped. They became finished. They became confident. They became too confident. And remember what I said in the beginning. Too confident kills creativity. And today, Nokia is down to a few % market share. A perfect example of a developing organization that became a developed organization. Sony was a developing organization when Japan was a developing country. Then Japan became a developed country and Sony became a developed organization. They should have done the iPad. They did the Sony Walkman, they should have done the iPad. But they didn't, because they stopped to innovate. They didn't see change, and they weren't able to combine knowledge. But the true question I want you to ask yourself when you go to bed tonight is this question: am I a developing person or am I a developed person? Are you curious at what is happening in the world, and are you seeing the change and understanding what it means? If you go here tonight and you decide that anything I hear tonight is old news and I already know, I have nothing to pick up, I'm sorry, you're a developed person. But if you sit here and say, there's something I can take away, there's something I can learn, there's something I can take that and combine with what I already know and create something new, you're a developing person. And now let's look finally at what it means when you are. This is 1989, it's the fall of the Berlin Wall. Do you remember it? One of the biggest historical events in your lifetime. Now, what did every press photographer do? Well, they went to West Berlin and they took a picture of the wall. Now, here's the problem. Everyone went to West Berlin, and everyone took a picture of the wall. Everyone but one. A Swedish photographer. He didn't go to West Berlin. He went to Mumbai. No, I'm just kidding. That would be so stupid. Nothing happened in Mumbai that was worth reporting compared to the Berlin Wall. Of course he went to West Berlin. Of course he went to West Berlin. Of course he took a picture from the West. But then he had the ability to not only look at the world from the West, but to also look from the world from the East and take pictures from both sides. And this is the picture that he took. See the hand? There's 100,000 photos from this side. There's one photo from this side. Take a guess. Which one was voted Best Picture in Europe 1990? Well, obviously this one. That's the power of creativity. That's the power of doing things differently. And it is the power of understanding what happens in the whole world and looking at things from different perspectives and combining them. And no country in the world is better positioned to do that than India, with all the religions, all the cultures, all different kinds of people, all different kinds of traditions. For you, this is so natural, you don't understand how natural it is. Take advantage of that. Good luck, and thank you very much.
See Leadership Series.